There's a moment in almost every custom build where the relationship between the builder and the client either gets stronger or it quietly is falling apart. And more often than people realize, that moment isn't a major mistake or a missed deadline or some big crisis on the job site. It's communication about a change order, something the client wants adjusted or something the field discovers that was not in the original scope, and how that conversation gets handled ends up shaping how the rest of the project feels for every person involved. So I want to talk about change orders because this is one of the most underestimated parts of the business and one of the easiest places to lose a client, even when you're doing really good work. So here's what I want to walk through. First, I want to explain what a change order actually is and why they're inevitable in a custom build. Because I think a lot of people, including builders, frame these very wrong from the start. Then I want to get into where the real damage happens, which usually isn't the change itself, but the communication behind it. After that, I'll walk through how we actually handle change orders so they don't blow up the relationship, and I'll talk about the contract language and the process side of it, because that matters way more than people give it credit for. And toward the end, I want to talk about why this whole topic ties back to something bigger, which is how clients actually decide whether they trust you or not. So let me start with what a change order really is, because I think the term gets used loosely. A change order is any modification to the original scope of work after the contract is signed. So that can come from the client who decides they want a different layout in the kitchen. It can come from the field where the framer opens up a wall and finds something nobody anticipated. It can come from the design side where an architect or designer revises something based on how it's looking in real life. It can even come from supply where a product the client picked is suddenly unavailable and we have to pivot. The point is, change orders are not a sign that something went wrong. They're just a normal feature of building something truly custom. If you have zero change orders on a custom home, say something's gonna bother some people, but it probably means you're not paying close enough attention. The mistake that most builders make, especially early on, is treating change orders like something to apologize for. They think it's an embarrassment or a sign off that their original estimate was off or a problem they're imposing on the client. And of course, once you've taken that posture, the conversation gets weird because you share that energy. You delay bringing things up because you don't want to be the bearer of bad news. So you absorb costs you shouldn't absorb because you feel guilty. You stack unbilled work and then you drop a big surprise number on the client 3 weeks later, sometimes at the end of projects if you're really bad, and wonder why they're upset. None of that comes from bad intent. It just comes from approaching the change order conversation as something defensive instead of something normal. The client side of this matters too, because clients don't usually come into a custom build understanding exactly how change orders work. What they've heard is horror stories. People rarely share the good news. They've read articles about builders nickel and diming, how they make too much money. They've talked to friends who have had bad experiences, so they walk in already suspicious that any cost that's beyond what's in real contract is bad. And if you don't address that head on at the beginning, every change order conversation later starts from a place of mild defensiveness on both sides. That's the dynamic that breaks the relationship. And once trust is gone, I don't think you can really get it back. So now here's where the real damage happens. And this is the pattern I've seen over and over again. A change happens in the field. Maybe it's small, maybe it's bigger. The builder or the project manager makes a judgment call. They get it done, they keep the schedule moving, and then weeks later, sometimes months later, unfortunately, the client gets a bigger build than they were expecting. They don't remember agreeing to it. They don't remember what it was for. They feel completely ambushed, taken by surprise, and even if this was a completely legitimate change and the price was totally fair, the way it landed makes them feel like they're being taken advantage of. Once that feeling sets in, it doesn't go away. Every other interaction from here on out starts to get filtered through with that same suspicion, that loss of trust. The other version of this is the builder who absorbs the cost rather than having a conversation. This is also wrong. They just don't want to bring it up. They don't want to seem difficult. They eat thousands of dollars across a dozen small changes over the course of a build, and that adds up to real money. What happens is they start to resent the client. They start to feel like the project is unfair, and that resentment always shows up in subtle ways. It's in how responsive you are and how much energy you bring to solving problems and how you ultimately communicate. Client feels that energy shift, even if they can't name exactly what caused it. So neither extreme works. You can't surprise people with bills, and you can't absorb costs and pretend everything's fine. So here's how I actually think this should be handled. It starts before the project even begins, at the contract and in the kickoff conversation. We tell every client directly that change orders are going to happen on a custom build. Not they might, but they will. We'll explain why. We'll explain that some will come from them, some will come from the field, some may even come from their design. That's all completely normal. We'll explain exactly how we handle them when they come up. That conversation up front does more than any contract clause. You are setting the right expectation that change orders are a part of the process, not a symbol that something has gone wrong and you don't know what you're doing. Then the process itself has to be tight. When something comes up, you document it. Immediately. You put together a quick scope and a price and you get it in front of the client. And here's the key: before the work happens, not after, before. The client has got to sign off in writing on that change, and then we proceed. You could even say that they have to pay for it before you make the change. While it sounds really simple, the discipline of doing this is what separates a clean operation from a messy one. Yes, It can slow things down sometimes, and that's always a fear of building a house. It's gonna take longer, it's gonna be slower. Yes, the client might have to make a decision faster than they'd like, but the alternative is a surprise many weeks later, and the cost of that surprise, trust, is way higher than the cost of a brief delay in the field or a conversation. The pricing side matters too. When a change order goes out, the client should be able to see what's driving the number. I'm not saying a line item breakdown of every nail, but enough to explain why it costs what it costs. If a small change has a bigger price tag because it requires undoing some work, tell them that. If something's more expensive than they expected because of the material at the spec they chose, again, just tell them that. Transparency and explaining the why is what makes the number feel fair, even if the number's bigger than they'd hoped or you would hope. That does happen. I'll acknowledge that there's another school of thought here, which is to try to lock everything down so tight up front that change orders are minimized. And there's some merit to this approach, especially on the design side. You can also build a little bit faster that way. But the more decisions the client makes before the build, the fewer they have to make under time pressure later. So yes, I'm a believer in pushing as much of the design and selection process as possible into pre-construction. You can't always do everything, but there's a lot of it that you can do to make the process smoother. But I think people who try to take that to an extreme, who try to eliminate changes entirely, are usually setting themselves up for a different problem. Custom homes evolve. They feel different in person than they did on paper. Clients see things in real life they didn't anticipate when they were looking at drawings. They might acknowledge they made a selection and they don't like it and they want to change it. You have to be prepared for that because the field and real life reveals things that you cannot see on a paper plan, even if you see it in 3D. Trying to pretend that won't happen creates a different kind of friction, where the client feels like you're boxing them in, where it's not truly custom, where the builder's just stuck holding on to something that genuinely should have been an additional cost. So my approach is to minimize change orders through good pre-construction and then handle the ones that do come up with a process that's clean and transparent. If you're a builder thinking about how this applies to your own operation, I'd start with two questions. First, how is this conversation being framed at the beginning of every project? If you don't have a clear, direct moment where you walk a new client through the change order process, that is the highest leverage thing you can fix right away. Second, what's your actual process when it comes up in the field? If the answer is something informal where it depends on the project manager or the moment or how busy you are, that's where the surprises come from. So immediately tighten that up. Build a simple, repeatable process and use it every time. You don't necessarily need a fancier software complicated system, but that can definitely help. What you need is consistency, whether that is a system or your own process. Paper signed, can be a napkin, as long as you have a process that works and documents it. The bigger principle underneath all of this is that clients aren't really buying a building from you. They're buying confidence in how you operate. The house gets built either way. What they're paying for beyond the physical product is the sense that they're in good hands, that nothing's being hidden from them, that when something comes up, they're gonna hear about it from you in a way that makes them feel like a partner in the decision instead of someone being managed. Change orders are one of the clearest tests of whether that's actually true, because they're moments of friction. And how you handle moments of friction tells the client more about you than how you handle the easy parts of the job. Easy parts are easy. The hard parts are where you stand out. The fundamentals here don't really change with the size of the build or the segment you're in. Be direct upfront about how change orders work. Document everything before the work happens. Document everything, really. Be transparent about pricing. Don't surprise people and don't quietly absorb costs you shouldn't. Treat every change order as a conversation, not as a transaction. Builders who run their projects this way tend to have clients who refer them to their friends and other clients, and clients that come back for second and third projects because they become a valuable part of the business over time and they feel a part of it. Builders who don't finish a project on good terms, they'll never hear from the client again. And they'll spend their careers while their referral pipeline is non-existent and they're always having to chase work. That's not a good place to be in. So if this was helpful, I'd appreciate a like and subscribe. If you've got a specific situation you're working through, whether it's a change order conversation that didn't go well or a process you're trying to build out, drop in the comments. I'll do my best to get back to you.